At my own family celebration, my father raised a glass and toasted my brother for bringing honor to our last name. Then he turned to me and said, "Her choices are her burden, not mine." In front of 100 people, I was erased in a single sentence. But 10 seconds later, the television behind him flashed a breaking news alert. I had just been promoted to Major General at 33. That moment didn't bring pride. It brought silence. Not a clap. Not a nod. Just the quiet shame of being invisible in the house where I once sent my entire paycheck. My name is Riley Stone, and this is not just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when truth becomes louder than legacy. But before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and how old are you? Don't forget to subscribe to Subtle Revenge Stories for more journeys that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. The sun was setting over our Missouri ranch, casting long orange shadows across the lawn, where red checkered tablecloths and patriotic bunting tried to make the gathering feel wholesome. Laughter floated through the air, carried by the scent of hickory-smoked ribs and cheap bourbon. Kids darted between lawn chairs. Adults balanced sweating bottles of beer in one hand and small talk in the other. It looked like something from a postcard until my father stood up. Harrison Stone, a man whose presence could quiet any room, rose from his seat with a bourbon glass in hand and cleared his throat. The conversations around us hushed almost instantly. Even the kids stilled. He looked at my brother Liam, standing tall in his tailored navy suit, and raised his glass. To my son, he said with conviction, "Captain Liam Stone, a man who carries the Stone family legacy with honor and brilliance." Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. Someone whistled. People turned to Liam as if royalty had just been knighted in front of them. I stood a few feet away in jeans and a dusty flannel boots still scuffed from the base. I didn't clap. I waited. Then my father turned to me. Our eyes met. His gaze was cold, unreadable, calculated. Then he spoke again. "And my daughter," he added, pausing as if the words were a burden. "Her choices are her own burden to carry." He didn't say my name. He didn't lift his glass. Just dropped the line like a dead weight into a sea of celebration. Laughter faltered. The air shifted. I felt every muscle in my body tense, like my own skin had betrayed me. I heard someone cough awkwardly. Someone else sipped too loudly. Liam smiled into his drink, smug and knowing. And I just stood there, every breath feeling heavier than the last. Have you ever been humiliated by your own father in front of the people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever felt your identity shrink under the weight of one sentence, one pause, one absence of your name? Then it happened. Behind him, the TV mounted near the outdoor bar flickered. The baseball game cut to breaking news. A Fox News anchor appeared, her voice calm but firm. "We've just received confirmation from the Department of Defense," she said. 33-year-old Major General Riley Stone has been confirmed as the strategic mind behind the global AI counteroffensive. My photo filled the screen. Army combat uniform, rank, name. My face. My truth. My father's hand trembled. His glass wobbled. But no one clapped. No one looked my way. The silence returned, thicker, heavier. And I realized then they weren't just proud of Liam. They were committed to pretending I didn't exist. I stood frozen, my face still lit by the blue glow of the television. The anchor continued listing my accomplishments, my rank, my strategy role, my leadership on international counter-AI operations. But her voice faded into a dull hum beneath the weight of what wasn't being said right in front of me. No one moved. No one spoke. My father's hand hovered midair, his bourbon glass trembling slightly, the amber liquid rippling like it too was unsure of what to do. I glanced around. Not one person met my eyes. Not Uncle Brent, whose son I once helped get into the Coast Guard. Not Aunt Linda, who used to ask me for stories from the field like I was some mythical figure. Not even the neighbor whose teenage son I had pulled from a flipped pickup during a flash flood 6 years ago. His kid had screamed my name for help. Now he wouldn't even look in my direction. Even the kids were silent hot dogs paused halfway to their mouths. It wasn't just awkward. It was purposeful. As if acknowledging me would break the illusion they'd all spent years rehearsing, that Liam was the legacy, and I was the shadow. That I was brave enough to fight wars, but not welcome enough to deserve a chair at the table. I didn't know what was worse, the indifference, or the effort they put into pretending I wasn't there. The TV kept rolling. Footage played of my deployments, briefings, aerial views of mission planning rooms where I stood at the head of the table. But the crowd at my father's party stood still, locked in a moment of denial too heavy for their polite smiles to mask. I looked down and realized my fingers were wrapped tightly around a bottle of water I didn't remember picking up. The plastic crinkled under the pressure of my grip. My chest was hollow, like the wind had been knocked out of me, but not from impact, from disappointment. I didn't want applause. I didn't even want credit. I just wanted one person, just one, to acknowledge what they had seen. Have you ever been so visible and yet so completely ignored? Have you ever stood in the center of a moment that should have been yours, only to feel like a ghost watching from the edges? I turned toward the house. My boots felt heavier with each step against the old wooden porch, as if every step away from the crowd was one more mile between who I had become and the family who never wanted to see it. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd always suspected. In this family, it wasn't truth that earned you a place. It was performance. And no matter how high I climbed, I was never in their script. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the murmurs outside like the end of a performance I was never invited to. The house smelled like cedar polish and memory sharp sweet, and slightly sour like something that had aged too long. I moved through the foyer, boots thudding against the hardwood, past the family picture wall I had stopped looking at years ago. But this time I did look. Row after row of Liam. At West Point, in a Navy dress uniform, shaking hands with a senator, standing beside Dad next to a brand new truck, keys in hand like a trophy. Each frame carefully dusted, evenly spaced. No gaps, no clutter, no me. For a few years, one photo had broken the pattern. It was of me on graduation day from airborne school mud, on my face, sweat on my brow, eyes blazing with a kind of pride I hadn't felt in years. But it was gone now, replaced by a fresh, high-gloss print of Liam in a slate-gray suit, smiling like the world owed him its best light. I turned toward the kitchen, throat tight. On the counter sat a strawberry pie. My pie. I'd made it the night before, fresh by hand, the way Mom used to teach me when I was 10. I brought it because I thought stupidly that maybe it would be enough to open something human in them. That maybe someone would ask, "Did you make this?" That maybe Mom would smile like she used to before Liam's accomplishments became the only currency in this house. But no one had touched it. Behind me, the back door creaked open. I didn't turn. "You didn't have to storm off," my mother's voice said, light and tense, like she was already bracing for the next thing to crack. "I didn't," I replied. "I walked." She hesitated, then added, "Your father didn't mean to hurt you." I let out a dry laugh. He didn't even say my name. Mom. Silence. She probably stood there wringing her hands like she always did when she couldn't fix something without breaking something else. I stared at the counter, at the pie that no one had claimed. "I'm a general," I said, still not turning. "I've led missions that saved lives. Thousands. But I'll never be enough, will I? You don't have to prove anything to us. But I did. And I do. And I think I always will." She stepped forward. I felt it in the shift of air. But I took a step back. Not tonight. Not anymore. Have you ever realized that love in your house had terms and conditions? That pride had a name, and it wasn't yours? That was the moment I knew this wasn't a bad night. It was a blueprint. And I was done asking for a place at a table set for someone else. 15 minutes later, I stood at the top of the attic stairs, flashlight in one hand, dust clinging to my sleeves. The heat up there was stifling, thick with insulation, old wood, and the smell of forgotten years. I pushed open the creaky door, stepping into shadows that flickered under the trembling beam of my light. This wasn't just storage. It was exile. A place where memories were sent to die quietly. I crouched low, ducking beneath angled beams. Boxes lined the edges like gravestones, holiday decorations, Liam's childhood trophies, a bin labeled Thanksgiving linens. I moved past each without pausing. I knew what I was looking for even if I didn't want to find it. Then I saw it. A soggy cardboard box in the farthest corner, half slumped behind a broken rocking horse. The words on the top were written in black marker, faded but unmistakable, Riley's stuff. All caps. My father's handwriting. Cold. Governmental. Like labeling equipment, not a daughter. I dragged it toward me. The tape peeled like brittle skin, and the flaps opened with a dry snap. Inside was chaos. No wrapping, no organization, just fragments. My first marathon medal dulled and tangled in a twisted ribbon. A green beret my grandfather Pop gave me the day I was accepted into Special Forces selection. He died 2 weeks later. A laminated letter from my battalion commander praising my judgment under fire during an ambush in Afghanistan. All dumped in like leftover mail. I reached deeper. Old notebooks from middle school. A faded hoodie I hadn't seen in over a decade. A handful of broken G.I. Joe figurines that weren't even mine. And at the bottom, bent and water damaged, was my Soldier of the Year certificate from the 82nd Airborne Division. I'd laminated it myself. It used to hang in my barracks. I stared at the crumpled corners and remembered the call I'd made home that day, breathless with pride. Dad, I won it. They called my name in front of the whole base. He'd replied flatly, "Good. Liam just got accepted into Georgetown's MBA. He's moving to DC soon. Hey, I've got to run. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for a year of my blood and grit to be reduced to background noise. Have you ever found pieces of your life tossed into a box like garbage? Have you ever realized that even your greatest victories weren't worth shelf space in someone else's story? I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. My heart had long since hardened to these small betrayals, but something in me calcified, right then solidified. They didn't just forget me. They chose to store me somewhere dark out of sight, where even pride couldn't find me. I picked up the medal, the beret, the certificate. I laid them gently in my lap, smoothing their edges with my fingers, handling them like explosives. Because in a way, that's what they were, truths too inconvenient to be displayed. I carried the box down from the attic like it held something fragile, though no one else in the house would have treated it that way. Back in my old bedroom now, stripped of posters painted beige and decorated with a generic home sweet home sign from some craft store, I set it at the foot of the bed. The silence in the room was suffocating but not unfamiliar. I sat the green beret still in my lap and let memory take over. I was 16. It was the night before my first state track meet. I had trained for months up before sunrise, running laps in the cold, taping my knees every evening before bed. Dad had promised he'd come. He'd even said he'd bring the good camera. I believed him. That night, I stood on the podium with a silver ribbon pinned to my chest, scanning the crowd, heart pounding not from victory but from hope. He never came. Later, Mom said he had a work thing, sweetheart, and I said nothing. Because I'd already learned what his love looked like. It showed up when it was convenient, and only if Liam hadn't done something mildly impressive that week. Liam had gotten a B+ on a math test that same day. Dad took him out for steak. That was the first time I realized his version of love had terms. Mine just never fit the criteria. Now, years later, I sat on another invisible podium this time with a nation clapping and my family silent. No camera flashes, no hugs, just the echo of absence. I ran my thumb across the worn edge of the Soldier of the Year certificate and exhaled. I remember the taste of powdered eggs and stale coffee from my first deployment more vividly than any birthday cake I ever had in this house. My first years in the Army were spent in barracks that smelled like boot polish and bleach. I slept with earplugs and ate from trays, sent money home each month. Every dollar felt like a tether, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it bought me a little belonging. Have you ever tried to buy your way into someone's love with good grades, clean uniforms, quiet obedience? I did. For years. Until the day I realized I was buying a seat at a table that had already assigned name cards, and mine wasn't there. I didn't feel bitter. I felt finished. I folded the beret, gently placed it atop the certificate, and closed the box. Not with anger, but with finality. Someone downstairs turned on music, classic rock, probably Liam's playlist. I didn't listen. I didn't. I was done tuning in to the frequency of their approval. I whispered aloud to no one. I am not the forgotten one. I am the proof you chose to ignore. And this time, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was claiming my place not in their story, but in mine. The next morning, I left the ranch before sunrise. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just slid the old screen door shut behind me and drove. The gravel crunched beneath my tires like the sound of something being broken for good. Missouri faded in the rear view, and with it so did the illusion that I was ever going to be enough for the Stone family. Back in North Carolina, I settled into the familiar rhythm of base life, early runs, briefings routine. But the silence in my apartment hit different now. Not lonely, just clean. Honest. I sat in my small kitchen that first weekend, back sipping coffee and staring at a bank statement. Line after line. Transfers labeled Home Support House Fund. Every month for nearly 7 years, I'd wired a portion of my paycheck back to my parents. Even during training. Even during deployment. While I was rationing toothpaste and stretching out MREs to avoid extra spending, I was funding a household that never acknowledged my effort. I once skipped a 4-day leave to save for what I thought would be their anniversary gift, a new dishwasher. They never said thank you. They never asked if I was eating. I told myself it was for the house. For Mom. Maybe Dad would finally fix the porch steps. But then came the call. It was a Sunday. I had just folded my last load of laundry and was letting myself enjoy a rare second cup of coffee. The phone rang. Mom. Her voice was bright, rushed. "Thanks for the money, honey," she said. Liam looked amazing in that Armani suit. Fit him like a glove, perfect for the New York trip. I blinked. "What trip?" "Oh, you know, the mixer at the Empire Hotel. Networking went great. Couldn't have pulled it off without your help." I felt my stomach twist. "You used the money I sent for Liam's suit." "Well," she said, hesitating now. "He really needed to look sharp. These opportunities don't come around twice." I don't remember the rest of that call. I think I made an excuse and hung up. I sat there staring at the wall, my heart thudding like a warning drum. I had passed on real meals, skipped new boots, patched up uniforms, so my brother could glide through Manhattan in designer wool. Have you ever realized in one cruel moment that your sacrifices were never seen as love, only expected as duty? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stopped sending money. No explanation, no confrontation, just silence. A clean cut. Weeks later, Dad called. "Riley," he barked, "since when did you become selfish? Cutting off support to your own family? You think you're too good for us now?" I held the phone away from my ear, then brought it back slowly. "I'm just learning from the best, sir." Then I hung up. That was the first boundary I ever drew, not with anger, with clarity. At first, the guilt came like clockwork. Around midnight, when the base fell quiet and even the night shift radios went static, I'd lie in bed and wonder, were they okay? Were they struggling without the money? Had I punished them too harshly? Then I'd remember Mom's voice giddy over Liam's suit. Armani. She said it like a prayer, like the holy grail of status. I remembered Dad's tone, accusation, not concern. And just like that, the guilt faded. Instead of wiring money home, I started doing something radical. I spent it on myself. Not on luxuries, just basics I'd put off for years. A decent mattress. Real winter boots. A secondhand bookshelf I painted white with my own hands. It felt strange at first, like I was breaking rules I'd never agreed to. But there was no one watching, no one to disappoint. And that emptiness, that silence began to feel like space. Like freedom. One weekend I went on a cabin trip with 2 squad mates. We split gas-grilled cheap burgers in the cold and passed around a 6-pack while arguing over which war movies got it most wrong. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't a social media moment, but I laughed. A full gut-deep laugh I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. And no one asked me for anything. No one expected me to earn my seat at the fire pit. They just passed me another marshmallow. That's when it hit me. They weren't family, but they saw me. They cared if I showed up. When I spoke, they listened. I wasn't useful to them, I was just me. And that was enough. Have you ever realized you were only loved for what you gave, not for who you were? That kind of truth doesn't hurt like a slap. It hurts like frostbite, slow, numb, and then devastating. One night, I called home out of impulse. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. There was nothing left to explain. And they hadn't called since I stopped paying. Silence used to terrify me. I mistook it for rejection, abandonment. But now I understood it could be a weapon. It could be armor. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. I wore that silence like a new uniform. And it fit better than any they'd ever tailored for me. My father's last words still echoed. You think you're too good for this family, but he never asked if I was eating. Never asked if I was safe. Never asked what it cost me to show up every time. So I stopped showing up. That decision didn't make me bitter. It made me whole. Because in choosing not to chase their approval anymore, I gave myself something they never did permission to rest. It happened in the most unassuming way. A Monday morning. Rain clung to my boots, my uniform damp from the brief jog across the Pentagon lot. I shook it off and entered the operations wing, steaming coffee in one hand, briefing folder in the other. I was the youngest officer in that room, the only woman in uniform. The rest were silver-haired colonels, contractors in expensive suits, and analysts who hadn't seen a battlefield in decades. My presentation was thorough. I had built the tactical model from months of drone recon field reports and late-night simulations. As I spoke, charts lighting up behind me, I noticed the others barely looked up from their phones. They nodded politely. Generic feedback followed. Solid analysis. We'll consider. The usual brush-offs. I felt myself shrinking again, but she stayed behind. Colonel Eva Ratova. Slim. Sharp eyes behind narrow wireframe glasses. Her posture straight like she'd never bowed to anyone or anything. She approached slowly, coffee in hand, and handed me a fresh cup, black, no sugar. Then she said, "You've got a strategic mind. Most people spend 3 decades trying to build that. Don't let them reduce you to a parachute and a pretty salute." Then she walked out. Just like that. That was the first time in years someone saw me. Not the daughter of Harrison Stone. Not the shadow of Liam. Just Riley, soldier, thinker, leader. Her words stayed with me like a compass. Months later, she requested me by name for a field mission. Afghanistan. Korangal Valley. The locals called it the Valley of Death. And they weren't wrong. One night, an ambush tore through our flank. Gunfire from the ridgeline. Screams over the radio. Our orders were clear: fall back, regroup. But pinned down behind a collapsed wall, Sergeant Cole Maitre was bleeding out, his leg mangled from shrapnel. The chatter turned cold. Too risky. Leave him. Protocol, numbers, acceptable losses. But I saw his eyes through the dust, not fear, but trust. Cover me. I barked. No hesitation. I low-crawled through the open zone bullets, whipping overhead, another soldier flanking me. We reached Cole and pulled him inch by inch back behind the rocks. I remember the heat of his blood soaking through my sleeves, the weight of his body as dead weight. That night in the field hospital, he handed me a crushed chocolate bar from his vest. "Thanks for not leaving me behind, Major," he whispered. I took the bigger half and nodded. "You would have done the same." He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone would have. But you did." That chalky chocolate half melted was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. And in that moment, for the first time, I understood family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when everyone else turns away. It started with a buzz, my phone vibrating in rapid bursts on my desk. I glanced at the screen, then around. Something felt off. Colleagues across the hallway stared at me, their faces tight, unreadable. No smiles, just that strange tension you feel when a secret's about to detonate. Colonel Rotova appeared at my door, no words, just a look. She nodded toward the break room. The television was already on. National broadcast. Fox and Friends. I walked in and there he was. My cousin, Ethan Vance, dressed in full West Point uniform posture, immaculate hair perfect. He was seated in studio, the Chiron below him, flashing Operation Iron Echo, a young leader's heroic story. My breath stopped. I watched frozen as Ethan began describing the mission, my mission, down to terrain layout decision points, the moment of enemy retreat. He painted himself as the hero who saved the team, the mastermind of the counteroffensive. His voice cracked with feigned emotion. "We didn't leave anyone behind," he said, a tear slipping dramatically down his cheek. And just like that, America heard a lie. Not a twisted version, not a partial miscredit. A complete hijacking. Rotova whispered beside me. "He's using your debriefing notes." Word for word. I didn't speak. Couldn't. I just stared. They had erased me, replaced me. On live national television. I walked out of the break room, my legs trembling under the weight of disbelief, and called my father. He answered immediately. "Riley," he said, cheerful, like nothing happened. "You saw the interview." I was still gripping the phone tight. "I saw it," I said. "That was my operation." He sighed, that familiar condescending tone bleeding through. "Look, I told Ethan he could use it. He needed a boost. This helps the family image. You're already a general." What's the harm in sharing the spotlight a little? I choked back the bile rising in my throat. Sharing. He stole it. "Don't make this about ego, Riley," he snapped. "You're being selfish." I hung up, not in anger, in clarity. My father had always treated my success as a burden. Now he'd turned it into a currency. My cousin performed heroics he never lived, and my own blood cheered him on for it. My inbox flooded with messages praising him. Meanwhile, I became a ghost in my own story. A colleague forwarded a link, an article on a respected military blog. Inside Iron Echo, the rising star of military intelligence. Ethan's photo, his ring, his badge, all perfectly staged. I didn't need to guess who wrote the press pitch. Liam, my brother, Pentagon's golden boy in public affairs. He was the architect. He buried me with precision. A sentence in that article sealed it. While senior officers hesitated, Lieutenant Vance took bold action. That wasn't just a lie. It was a knife. And for the first time in my career, I clenched my fists, not in battle, but in betrayal. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, television, muted the city outside, moving on like nothing happened. But inside me, something cracked, not like glass, but like steel under tension. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief. It was the cold, hard clarity that only betrayal can forge. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't family drama. This was war. Political, institutional, and calculated. The next morning, I received an internal memo. My access badge was revoked. I was suspended pending a security investigation regarding classified drone data. The accusation was absurd, but the timing was surgical on the exact anniversary of my enlistment. 15 years in uniform. Not one infraction. And now this. The signature at the bottom of the memo wasn't real, but I recognized the alias MJR Delta, a ghost clearance mark used only by high-level brass. One of the few who had access was General Adrian Conquid, the same man whose contracts I'd cost years ago by exposing flaws in his drone logistics model. He had motive means, and now opportunity. I knew this wasn't just family revenge. It was institutional suppression. I wasn't just being erased. I was being buried. I stared at the suspension notice, my fingertips numb. But I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the window, and picked up a secure line one I hadn't touched in years. It had one number programmed. The voice on the other end answered after 2 rings. "General." "Spectre," I said. "Miss me?" He replied, low and amused. "I need you to find a ghost. Codename MJR Delta." He didn't hesitate. "Target acquired. What's the plan?" I turned from the window and looked at the blank wall across my office. We exposed them. Every thread, every file, every back door they crawled through. I paused. "And when we find the truth, we burn the lie to the ground." I didn't go to sleep that night. I drafted not a resignation letter, but a war map. I listed names, times, clearance logs, message chains. Spectre set up an off-grid server bunker in Arlington. Within hours, we had evidence of IPs pinging from inside Conquid's office, breadcrumbs from someone arrogant enough to think no one was watching. At the same time, a journalist reached out, Sarah Jennings, sister of Sergeant Cole Maytree, the soldier I pulled out under fire years ago. She said she had something on Liam. It was bigger than Ethan. Bigger than Conquid. My own brother had been orchestrating press leaks, arranging interviews, coordinating the erasure of my name to craft the Ethan Vance legend. It was a full campaign, scripted, deliberate, and rehearsed. Every story, every quote, every headline was a brick in the narrative they built on top of my bones. That night, I didn't sleep out of exhaustion. I stayed awake because I finally knew what had to be done. They thought I was out. They thought I'd vanish. But they forgot one thing about soldiers like me. We don't break in battle. We reorganize. We retaliate. And when the storm hits, we don't run. We lead. The hearing room was suffocating not because of its size, but because of its weight. Capitol Hill's Committee on Armed Services. Live broadcast. Every seat filled. Every camera red-eyed and rolling. I walked in wearing my ceremonial dress blues, polished, pressed, and battle-tested. There was no salute, no announcement. Just the sound of my boots against marble, and the hush that followed. They weren't used to seeing generals this young, let alone women, and definitely not women like me, uninvited, unbent, and unapologetic. At the front sat General Adrian Conquid, a row of medals glaring from his chest like an armored facade. Next to him, Liam, my brother, tight-lipped, suited, unreadable. And beside Liam sat Ethan Vance, still smug, still polished, like the lie hadn't already started cracking in his hands. I didn't look at them. I faced the panel. A senator from Delaware cleared his throat and leaned toward the mic. "General Riley Stone, you've requested this hearing to respond to allegations of national security breach and misconduct. The floor is yours." I adjusted the mic. For 15 years, I've served this country in war zones, intelligence rooms, and digital battlefields. I never asked for praise. I never sought headlines. I asked for the truth to matter. I paused and let the silence settle. But truth, I continued, has become inconvenient. And today, I'm going to show you why I was suspended, not because I failed in my duty, but because I threatened the comfort of men who trade integrity for narrative. I motioned to the tech assistant. A screen flickered behind me. I played the broadcast clip, Ethan's appearance on national television. His words, his performance, his tear. Then I played the original mission feed. The black box field audio. My voice. My commands. My coordinates. Gunfire. Tactical orders. Evacuation calls. There was no Ethan. Just me. A low murmur rippled through the room. But I didn't stop. Ethan Vance, I said, was never part of Operation Iron Echo. He hijacked a mission to build a myth. Another click. An email chain surfaced. Concade's digital signature offering Ethan a promotion in military intelligence in exchange for favorable media engagement. This was bribery disguised as branding. A lie written in stars and ribbons. I turned to the next screen. Liam Stone. I said, my tone sharp as glass. Public Affairs Officer. Pentagon. He orchestrated the media push-coordinated journalist access and personally undermined my record through strategic leaks and off-book interviews. I played a clip. Liam's voice. She's got medals, sure, but don't confuse luck for talent. The real skill is narrative. Gasps. Some senators shifted uncomfortably. Liam didn't blink. Finally, I pulled up the last email string. My father's correspondence with Concade. Subject line, behavioral notes, Riley. His words quoted directly, volatile under pressure. Resists male leadership. Emotionally rigid. May require long-term monitoring. My voice didn't shake. He didn't defend me. He armed them. He gave my enemies the vocabulary to destroy me. I closed my folder. This wasn't a security breach. It was character assassination. This wasn't oversight. It was orchestration. The room was still. I met Concade's eyes. You underestimated me, General. That's your legacy. Then Liam's. You weaponized the media because you didn't have the spine to look me in the eye. That's your legacy. And finally, my father's. You traded your daughter's dignity for family optics. That's your legacy. No applause. Just the truth cracking the marble silence like thunder. I stepped back from the mic, and in that stillness for the first time I wasn't a rank. I wasn't a burden. I was a reckoning. I didn't head home after the hearing. I couldn't. I walked straight to the reflecting pool in front of the Capitol. The sky had darkened to that dusky blue that makes everything feel heavier. I pulled off my gloves, letting the cool air sting my fingers. I stared into the glassy surface, expecting some sense of peace, but all I saw was motion, the reflection of the dome behind me, and ripples where the breeze dared to speak. My phone buzzed. Ava Ratova. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew. The mission had just landed. Behind me, the sound of footsteps approached and paused. Reporters. A few voices called out General Stone. Do you have a statement? But I kept walking. Not out of fear. Out of timing. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. Not until the transcripts were published. Not until the dominoes fell all the way to the top. Back in Arlington, I returned to the safe house, quiet, dim, shielded by more encryption than the White House server. Sarah Jennings sat at the small kitchen table, typing with fury, face lit by the glow of her laptop. She looked up as I entered. You're already trending, she said. 12 minutes. Hashtags are exploding. They're calling you the General of Truth. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't proud, but because this wasn't pride. This was relief. Cold-earned, unglamorous relief. That's dangerous, I said quietly. No, she replied, eyes still on the screen. It's overdue. Later that night I sat by the window, coffee and hand boots still dusty from Capitol marble. Spectre messaged me just 3 words, it's done. I opened the message. Attached were links to 3 major networks, all running my testimony side by side with the mission audio. The footage had gone viral. Ethan Vance deleted his social media within the hour. No public statement, just disappearance. His image, the golden boy of Operation Iron Echo, had shattered under the weight of facts. Liam hadn't responded publicly either. But word had spread. His reassignment came within 48 hours, a quiet transfer to a rural base in Montana. No press release, just silence. Sarah had obtained a copy of the memo. Career preservation protocol, it read. They were distancing him without admitting guilt. Standard practice for rot in a tailored suit. General Concade, though, wasn't going down without clause. Rumors swirled about internal damage control attempts to shift focus onto protocol flaws, distractions through unrelated investigations. But it didn't matter. The truth was now oxygen. People were breathing it in faster than Concade could suffocate it. The walls were cracking. The system finally was blinking. That evening, as we sat around a small bourbon fire pit in Eva Rotova's backyard, she handed me a glass and said, "You did it." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I survived it. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "And now I rebuild. On my terms." We clinked glasses without ceremony, without speeches. Just two women burned and branded by a system that taught them silence, finally choosing noise. Not rage. Not vengeance. Clarity. The next morning I woke before sunrise, not out of anxiety, but instinct. The kind you sharpen in war zones where the quiet before dawn feels like a lie. The coffee was bitter and black, and the memory of my father's last email still burned like acid in my mind. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't even denied it. Silence that was his last defense. And silence this time was its own confession. A new message popped up in my inbox, this one from a junior officer at Fort Bragg. No subject line. Just a single sentence, "Ma'am, we're watching, we're proud." I stared at that line longer than I'd stared at any headline. That one sentence cut deeper meant more than 1,000 news anchors could ever say. It reminded me that this wasn't just my battle anymore. It never had been. This was about every soldier whose story was edited out of history. That morning I reopened the notebook I'd carried through every deployment. Most pages were filled with coordinates, reconnaissance sketches, mission protocols. But I flipped to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote Phase 2. This wasn't about vengeance. Not anymore. It was about reconstruction. About breaking down what was rotten and refusing to rebuild it the same way. That's how institutions change, one refusal at a time. Spectre called in mid-morning. "We've traced 3 additional shell servers tied to Concade's digital trail," he said. 2 domestic, 1 off-site in the Caymans. "Money laundering?" I asked. "And media influence ops," he confirmed. He wasn't just protecting Ethan. He was building a legacy pipeline for Liam, for himself, for anyone willing to trade principle for power. I nodded. Then we burned the pipeline down. By noon, I had scheduled 2 off-record meetings, one with Sarah, the other with a retired inspector general known for dismantling corruption during the late drone reform era. We didn't speak in hypotheticals. We spoke in data, in timelines, in terms like pattern of obfuscation and manipulated operational briefings. Each conversation, each file brought me closer to the conclusion I had already felt in my bones. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was treason against truth. And when truth is betrayed, it remembers. It waits. It sharpens its blade in the dark. That night I stood alone in the underground server room with Spectre. The monitors cast a faint green glow across his face. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm calculating," I replied. One more mistake from their side, just one, and this entire machine collapses under its own weight. "You sure you want that?" he asked. "Collapse means no coming back." I didn't even blink. "That's the point." Spectre nodded, then turned back to the screens. "We're almost there. We didn't drink. We didn't toast. We documented. We archived. We made the rot undeniable. And when the moment came, we would light the fuse. Not in secret. Not in revenge. In public. In purpose. The final piece came wrapped in silence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even intentional. Just a small oversight, an unencrypted file attachment sent by a mid-level comms officer who copied the wrong Riley in a reply-all thread. That's how it works sometimes. Empires don't fall by explosions. They trip on pebbles. I opened the attachment. Inside a calendar memo showing Ethan Vance's heroism media push scheduled weeks before his Fox interview. Next to it, briefing notes written in Liam's shorthand. Underlined ensure Riley's operational role is minimized focus on Ethan's emotional appeal. It was the smoking gun. Not a bullet, but a script. And now I had proof they didn't just lie. They planned to erase me. Spectre whistled low when I showed him. This is the kind of mistake that kills careers, he said. Not just theirs, I corrected. It exposes the whole ecosystem, the generals, the media partners, the PR strings. This is systemic. Sarah met me the next morning at a law office downtown, one of the few still willing to take on defense bureaucracy. She laid out a press plan, staggered leaks, timed disclosures, and a coordinated whistleblower statement filed with the Office of Military Ethics. They'll try to discredit you, she warned. They'll say you're emotional, unstable, bitter. Let them, I said. This isn't about my reputation. It's about the records they buried and the voices they silenced. By midweek, the first tremors hit. A military analyst tweeted a question, "Where's the real footage from Operation Iron Echo?" It was retweeted 12,000 times in an hour. By midnight, defense forums were filled with speculation. Whispers about manipulation command cover-ups, inconsistencies in Ethan's public version. The machine was wobbling. All we had to do was push. 2 days later, I walked into a pre-scheduled Armed Services Oversight hearing on Capitol Hill. Not as a defendant, not as a guest, as a witness, a soldier, a general. The room was tight with tension, Concade in dress blues, Liam in suit and tie, Ethan pale behind the eyes. I carried no notes, no binder. Just a small flash drive and the conviction of someone who had nothing left to prove, only truth left to deliver. When the mic clicked on, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You've heard their stories, I said. Now let's look at the facts. One by one, I presented the evidence. Audio from the mission, emails with military stamps, witness logs, Sarah's compiled media coordination files, Spectre's digital footprint analysis. I didn't accuse, I exposed, I didn't scream. I illuminated. The panel listened in silence. So did the press. So did my father, who sat in the back row expressionless. And when I finished, I looked them in the eye, not as Riley the daughter or Riley the subordinate, but as General Stone, unbroken, unbought, and unafraid. This wasn't a mistake, I concluded. This was strategy, a strategy built on erasure. But you cannot erase someone who remembers who they are. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I smiled. The fallout wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, methodical, like a storm that floods the basement before you even hear the rain. Within 48 hours, the Pentagon issued a formal statement acknowledging a review of Operation Iron Echo's reporting inconsistencies. By the end of the week, Ethan's story was pulled from every official channel. His name stopped trending. The magazine covers disappeared. His social media accounts went dark. Then came the resignation letter. General Adrian Concade effective, immediately citing personal reasons. There was no ceremony, no flag folding, just a footnote in the defense wire. Liam was reassigned to a public relations desk at a remote logistics base in Montana. The kind of post where your inbox stays empty and your email signature is longer than your duties. He didn't call. Neither did my father. And that silence, it didn't sting like it used to. It felt like peace. A peace earned, not given. But it wasn't just about their downfall. It was about what rose in the space they used to occupy. Messages started pouring in from junior officers, retired commanders, even civilian contractors. They weren't long, but they landed heavy. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. You spoke for all of us who stayed silent. You reminded me why I joined in the first place. I saved everyone. Not out of pride, but as proof that truth when spoken ripples. I went back to Missouri one last time. Not to the family ranch, but to Jefferson County. I found a stretch of land by the edge of the forest oak trees, thick with history, and a creek that whispered instead of roared. I signed the deed in my own name. Not Stone's legacy, not anyone's heir. Just Riley. I didn't bring medals. I didn't bring files. I brought a duffel bag, a stack of notebooks, and the quiet resolve of someone who knew that healing doesn't come from applause. It comes from planting something in soil that never tried to choke you. Later that fall, I opened the Stone Institute for Honorable Leadership. A school, yes, but also a sanctuary. For those who led and were punished for it. For those who spoke truth and were silenced. For those who fought and came home only to realize the real battle was in being seen. We didn't teach strategy from textbooks. We taught it from scars. And on the opening day, as the first cadets arrived, wide-eyed, uncertain, I stood at the gate and whispered to myself, "Let them inherit ashes. I'll inherit clarity." For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting to be allowed in. I had built the table. I had chosen who sat at it. And I wasn't asking anyone for permission anymore. It started with shovels, not speeches. We broke ground on a cool October morning, the kind where the wind smells like change, and your hands don't stop moving just to stay warm, but to stay present. The Stone Institute wasn't just a building. It was a refusal. A line drawn between what had been done to me and what I would do differently. I didn't name it out of pride. I named it to reclaim. To take back a name that had always meant silence and turn it into something that meant voice. The curriculum wasn't traditional. We didn't start with rules of engagement or media protocol. We started with questions. When were you last afraid to speak? What did it cost you to stay silent? Who would you be if no one expected anything of you but truth? The cadets didn't know how to answer at first, but in the quiet, their real selves began to surface. Some with anger, some with tears, all with stories. One woman, Lieutenant Ortiz, had led a unit through a failed extraction overseas. She was blamed for the mission's collapse, even though her superiors had overridden her intel. She said they told me I cracked under pressure. But I didn't crack. I warned them. They just didn't listen. Her voice shook, but her hands didn't. That mattered. I told her they didn't listen because they thought leadership had a gender. You're here to unteach them that. Some cadets asked if we'd ever get accreditation if our methods would be recognized officially. I told them recognition isn't the goal. Integrity is. I didn't want another institution that rewarded pageantry and punished dissent. I wanted something that felt like standing barefoot on truth, even when it burned. Especially when it burned. We built with our hands. Veterans poured concrete. Students laid insulation. I swept sawdust from the floor every morning with the same care I once used prepping for briefings. The rhythm was different now, slower, grounded, but no less purposeful. One night as the roof beams went up, Cole Maitre, still walking with a limp from the ambush years ago, looked up and said, "We're not just building shelter. We're building armor." And he was right. This place wouldn't protect us from betrayal, but it would make us stronger for having known it. The ghosts of the Pentagon of hearings of war, they didn't vanish. They sat beside me at dusk, silent, but acknowledged. I didn't try to erase them. I just refused to let them lead. And as the first lights flickered on inside the main hall that winter, I stood back, watched the glow stretch across the gravel like sunrise, and asked the question I'd been carrying for years. What kind of legacy begins when you stop chasing someone else's? I didn't have the full answer. But I knew the old legacy had ended. And this was the beginning of mine. It was early spring when the gravel path crunched beneath unfamiliar boots. I was kneeling in the memorial garden behind the institute, pulling winter weeds, my sleeves rolled up soil under my nails. The air smelled like thawing earth and budding tulips. That's when I saw them, brown leather, polished, hesitant. I didn't need to look up. I knew those boots. My mother crouched beside me without a word. She picked up the trowel I'd left aside and began working beside me. We moved in silence. But this silence wasn't cold. It was willing. After the final row was cleared, she reached into her coat pocket and placed something in my palm. It was my first marathon medal, the one I thought had been discarded. The ribbon had been pressed flat, the bronze clean to a quiet shine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't brave." I didn't answer right away. I turned the medal in my hand, remembering the 16-year-old girl who had run past pain and disappointment just to feel worthy. Then I nodded. Not because I forgave everything, but because I was finally done carrying it alone. We sat on the bench near the edge of the garden. The wind stirred the petals. She said I didn't know how to stand up to him. To your father. Her voice broke there, and I saw the same fear I used to carry. I thought silence was safer, she admitted. I looked at her, really looked, and said, "Silence doesn't protect. It erodes." She nodded, eyes wet. "You were never the problem, Riley. I just didn't know how to defend you without burning the whole house down." I smiled faintly. Then maybe it was time the house burned. We didn't speak of the hearing. Not of Ethan. Not of Liam. She didn't try to justify. She didn't ask for anything. That was new. Instead, before she left, she paused by the gate and asked softly, "Is there room here? For someone who wants to learn how to start over?" I didn't answer. I just pointed to the open door of the community hall. We start at 0700. No latecomers. That evening I returned to my office and placed the medal on the shelf beside the green beret and the unit patch from Cole. Artifacts not of victory, but of endurance. I stared at them for a while and then turned to my journal. On a clean page I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't permission. It's a release." And I let it go. Weeks passed. Classes expanded. Word about the Institute spread faster than we expected. Young officers, veterans, and even civilian leaders began arriving from across the country, some by word of mouth, some by reputation, others by desperation. I spent less time behind a podium and more time among the people. One evening I stood at the back of the main lecture hall. A group of cadets were laughing quietly over coffee and their notes, their boots muddy from the trail behind the property. On the whiteboard, someone had left my last lesson in big, uneven handwriting. "Truth doesn't need a megaphone, just courage." I stayed in the shadows of that room for a while, watching, listening, letting the rhythm of ordinary moments wash over me. Then I stepped forward, erased the board, and wrote a new question. What makes a leader worth following? When class began the next morning, I didn't introduce myself. I didn't give them a title. I just pointed to the question. The room went still. Then slowly voices filled the space. Stories about broken units, failed missions, betrayal, small victories that never made it into reports, and moments when someone should have spoken up and didn't. No one talked about rank. They talked about impact, about scars, about silence. After the session ended, I stayed behind. A young woman lingered near the door. Sharp eyes, restless energy. "Ma'am," she said. "How do you know when to stop fighting?" I thought of my father, of Ethan, of Liam, of the battlefield and the boardroom, and finally of that Capitol Hill hearing room. I answered carefully. "When the battle costs you more than the wound. When peace stops being the absence of noise and becomes the presence of alignment." She didn't write it down. She just nodded. And that told me she understood. That night, I sat alone in my office and opened the leather-bound journal I'd carried through 3 deployments. Most of the pages held coordinates, field notes, and sketches from war zones. But now, I turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote in steady print, "Honor is not inherited. It is built." Then I closed, the book stood, and looked out across the property. Somewhere out there, boots were marching not toward war but toward truth. And that was the leadership I wanted to leave behind. One overcast afternoon in early spring, I was kneeling in the memorial garden behind the institute, pulling out stubborn winter weeds when I saw a pair of brown leather boots step onto the gravel path. I didn't look up right away. I knew those boots. I had spent a lifetime chasing their approval and a lifetime being cut by their silence. She didn't speak at first, just crouched beside me and picked up the small trowel I had set down. We worked in silence this time, not the cold kind, but one that was willing, careful. When the final flower bed was cleared, she reached into her coat pocket and placed something in my palm. My first marathon medal. The one I thought they had thrown away or forgotten. It was clean polished. I looked at it, then at her. My mother's eyes were full but steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking just enough. I wasn't brave. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just closed my fingers around the medal and nodded. That gesture wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. I wasn't forgiving her for what happened. I was forgiving myself for carrying it all for so long. The shame, the hunger for approval, the belief that maybe one day they'd see me. That moment in the garden didn't erase anything, but it marked something. A turn. A space cleared in the soil. In the weeks that followed, our classes grew. Applications tripled. People came from places I'd never heard of, some bringing their own broken pieces, looking for clarity, for meaning, for a place where truth didn't come second to strategy. One night, I stood at the edge of the main hall again, watching cadets laugh quietly over their notes. On the whiteboard were still scribbled words from our last class, philosophy. Tactics. Purpose. But I saw something else too, healing. Not the kind you plan, but the kind that arrives in fragments, in late-night conversations, in silent moments, in shared weight. That evening, I wrote a new lecture. Not about tactics or medals, but about betrayal, about loss, about how those things, when faced honestly, don't destroy you. They refine you. The next morning, I began class with no preamble. I walked to the front, picked up a marker, and wrote on the board, "What does it mean to lead after being broken?" I turned to face the room. Let's find out together. That night, after the last lecture emptied out and the gravel paths fell silent under the Missouri stars, I walked the perimeter of the land, my land. No longer borrowed, no longer inherited, but built. The trees whispered above their branches, waving like sentinels. For the first time in decades, I wasn't strategizing, wasn't defending, wasn't bracing for impact. I was just breathing. A slow rhythm of soil, air, and clarity. I passed the garden where my mother and I had weeded in silence. Her apology still echoed, not because it absolved anything, but because it marked something real. In my office, I opened the old black journal I had carried through war zones, hearings, betrayals. Its pages, once crowded with intel maps, strategy now held something more fragile: truth. I turned to a clean page and wrote, "What does a life look like when it's no longer chasing?" I didn't answer. I let the questions sit like a seed. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be lived. Weeks later, I stood behind the main hall, watching cadets plant flags along the trailhead we had cleared as a team. Ortiz, the sharp-eyed cadet who once asked when to stop fighting, led the charge with boots still muddy and a fire in her step. These weren't just soldiers in training. They were legacy shapers. Not my father's legacy. Not the stone name carved into glass and granite. But the one I was building every day, with voice, with scars, with choices. Later that spring, the Department of Defense requested I consult on a new ethics curriculum for senior officers. I read the proposal, considered it carefully. Then I rewrote it. Not just the wording, but the tone. No more euphemisms, no more soft landings. My version opened with this line: "Leadership without integrity is just theater." They pushed back. I didn't yield. And eventually, they agreed. I wasn't chasing a title anymore. I was building a standard. one day a letter arrived from a soldier I had never met. It was handwritten, the ink smudged like it had traveled far. He said he'd watched the hearing, read every article, and started therapy after 15 years of silence. "You didn't just clear your name," he wrote. "You gave us permission to speak." That letter lives in a frame near the window, not out of pride, out of reminder of why I chose to burn down the lie and plant something better. As summer came, the oak trees filled out, the sky turned wider, and the halls of the Stone Institute echoed with voices unafraid, unashamed, unfinished. I knew this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a movement. One built not from bloodline but from backbone. Not from inheritance but from intent. And that I finally understood was legacy. Sometimes family is where you're born, but other times it's what you build when the ones who should have stood by you walk away. If this story taught you anything, let it be this: honor is not given, it's lived, chosen, earned. And sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't standing up in battle, but walking away from a legacy built on silence. If you're a parent listening, now ask yourself, what kind of legacy are you leaving for your children? And if you've ever been dismissed, erased, or betrayed, like I was, know this: you are not the burden. You are the proof. Have you ever been through something like this? How did you rise from it? What did you learn? Share your story in the comments. If this meant something to you, like, subscribe, and share. Let's build something better together. Thank you for listening.